Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's my great pleasure to rise and speak on the Australian Education Amendment Bill. On the 2nd of May, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Turnbull government announced an extra $18.6 billion in schools funding on top of the already record funding for Australian schools to be delivered over the next 10 years. This will bring our total 10-year investment to a record $242.3 billion from 2018 to 2027. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, what we are doing in this bill is implementing the true Gonski needs-based funding model. And as the member for Macquarie leaves the chamber, which is a shame because I did want to actually pick her up on a very fundamental flaw she made in her contribution. She mistakenly misrepresented the member for Warringah and the government's policy at the time. And I want to make this very, very clear. In 2013, clearly the member for Macquarie, as a candidate for the Labor Party, was not listening very intently, because our commitment, Mr Deputy Speaker, was to commit on a unity ticket to the first 4 years of funding, not to the 6-year package. Now, the member for Warringah made that very, very clear. So it just goes to show how easily the member for Macquarie can get up in this parliament and seek to misrepresent our commitment. Now, why do we do that, Mr Deputy Speaker? We did that because the bottom line, and we keep hearing from members opposite about this additional $22 billion, the bottom line, Mr Deputy Speaker, this was never in Labor's budget. This was never incorporated into the forward estimates. It was pushed off into the never-never in years 5 and 6. All of that funding, so-called increase, was never delivered as part of Labor's budget. So what we have seen, and we made a very firm commitment, we would agree to the first 4 years of funding. And in fact, when we came in to government in 2013, we discovered that the Labor Party had shortchanged a number of states, and we had to very quickly find an additional $1.2 billion. So what we found here is a lot of smoke and mirrors from members opposite about what the funding they committed to, because, Mr Deputy Speaker, if the Labor Party was serious about this so-called $22 billion, it would have put this money in its budget. It would have included this money in its forward estimates. And what we've seen from the Labor Party, like so many other budgets, like so many other slippery figures, is an absolute failure to deliver on what it said it would do. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, we've had a lot of hard work, and I want to commend the Minister for Education for the incredible amount of hard work to fix Labor's mess when it comes to schools funding. And we have had a really astounding result in Corangamite. Every school goes forward. In 2017, funding to all 66 schools in Corangamite is equal to $82.967 million. In 2018, this increases by $3.85 million. And over the next 10 years, the Commonwealth will provide total funding to Corangamite schools of $1.063 billion. That's more than $1 billion over the next 10 years, and that includes an additional $233.9 million, and that's through a fair, needs-based funding model. I do want to make the point, Mr Deputy Speaker, that Australian government funding for schools has been increasing for several decades, and while our funding has been growing, our results have been in decline. This is an issue that was never really dealt with by members opposite, who tended to put their head in the sand in looking at how our dollar is effectively being spent in our schools. How much funding we provide is obviously very important, but what we do with it is what really counts. And I reflect, before I was elected, I reflect on when Julia Gillard first announced the so-called Gonski needs-based funding model, and very quickly what occurred, Mr Deputy Speaker, was it became evident that, consistent with David Gonski's model, that some schools would either have their funding stagnate or they would actually go backwards, because that's what David Gonski intended. He intended to look after the schools which most needed the funding, including schools in Corangamite. And when this list became evident and was published, Julia Gillard quickly, basically completely demolished David Gonski's entire policy by committing that no school would be worse off. Now, the problem with that, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that the Labor Party did not have the courage to implement a true needs-based model. The very wealthy schools, which David Gonski had recommended might need to take either a small reduction or a freezing of their funding, actually were given the guarantee by Labor, by members opposite, and by the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard, that they would actually get an increase. Now, that's not what David Gonski intended. So we actually have demonstrated, I say as a government, considerable courage in saying to some schools, you won't do, some very wealthy schools, you won't do quite as well, because we are implementing a model that puts schools that need funding the most first. Mr Deputy Speaker. And so that's why we really had to do a lot of hard work to fix the mess that Labor left behind, and we've heard a lot about the 27 different agreements and some of the various secret deals that were implemented with a whole range of different sectors of the school communities across Australia. So this bill before the Parliament today, Mr Deputy Speaker, will implement the government's commitment to support parental choice, to deliver real needs-based funding and long-term certainty for parents and schools, and tie funding to reforms that evidence improvement in student outcomes. The bill will also set Commonwealth schools funding for the next 10 years and beyond. It will apply new indexation arrangements to Commonwealth schools funding, and it will transition schools to a common Commonwealth share of the Schooling Resource Standard by 2027. And on the 2nd of May, when this policy was announced, David Gonski joined the Prime Minister and the Minister for Education, and he said this: "I am very pleased to hear that the Turnbull government has accepted the fundamental recommendations of our 2011 report, and particularly regarding a needs-based situation. I'm very pleased that there is substantial additional money, even over indexation, and in the foreseeable future." So what David Gonski said on that day with the Prime Minister and with the Minister for Education is that we are implementing a true needs-based model, which Labor failed to do. That is the absolute fundamental problem, because, and I'll take the interjection from members opposite, they're saying rubbish. Well, it's not rubbish, because in the original formula, Mr Deputy Speaker, some schools, some very wealthy schools, were actually meant to lose some of their funding or to have some of their funding stagnate. Now, Julia Gillard panicked, the Labor Party panicked, they did not have the courage to implement the true Gonski needs-based funding model, and now what we are doing is fixing this mess. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm incredibly proud of what we are doing with schools-based funding, and it's wonderful to see Gonski 2.0 being implemented by our government. In Corangamite, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to reflect particularly on some of the Catholic schools and some of the increases that they'll be receiving over the next 10 years. Sacred Heart Colac in 2017, $4.007 million, a total over 10 years of $48.5 million, an increase of $8.456 million. St Aloysius in Queenscliff, $1.18 million this year from the Commonwealth, 14.4 over 10 years, an increase of $2.5 million. St Brendan's, Coragulac, $570,000 this year, a total of $6.9 million over 10 years, and an increase of $1.204 million. Trinity College, which is a wonderful secondary Catholic school in Colac, this year is receiving from the Commonwealth $9.6 million. It will receive $116 million over 10 years, an increase, Mr Deputy Speaker, of $20.378 million. And I know that I've been contacted by some parents from Trinity College concerned about their funding, and I want to just reiterate to them that of all the schools in Corangamite, and this is obviously also based on the schooling resource standard and trying to equal the, to deliver a fair and level playing field, Trinity receives more money per student than any other school in Corangamite. In 2017, each student receives $13,172 from the Commonwealth, and in 2027, this will rise per student to $18,416 per student. So this is a great outcome for Trinity College in Colac. This is a very substantial increase, $116 million in total over 10 years, an increase in excess of $20 million. So what does that allow all schools to do when it comes to planning their future? It allows them, Mr Deputy Speaker, to plan their future with certainty. The schools know that this funding is actually embedded in legislation. It starts not years 5 and 6 like Labor did in the Never Never. It starts from the 1st of January 2018. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm looking at my watch because I've got a meeting in a few moments. I'm meeting with the principals of Colac Secondary College, Simon Dewar, and also Sandra Elizoz, who is the new principal of Belmont High. And I'm very pleased that over 10 years, Belmont High School, which is another incredible school in Corangamite, will be receiving an additional $10 million from the Commonwealth, recognising, of course, Mr Deputy Speaker, that the majority, 80% of funding for government schools comes from the state. So we are the minority funder, 20%, heading towards 20% from the Commonwealth. And Colac Secondary College, led by the wonderful and very enthusiastic Simon Dewar, will receive an additional $5.45 million over 10 years. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I am incredibly proud of what this bill delivers. It delivers certainty. It delivers fairness. It delivers transparency. Every single school, every parent can now go onto the school's estimator, onto the website, and look at what their school will receive, not just this year, not just next year, but over the next 10 years. And schools now, for the first time, will be able to properly plan long-term. And I know I was at the gala dinner, the Christian Schools Gala Dinner on Monday night in Parliament House. And I sat with the principal of Covenant College in North Geelong, and Covenant includes a lot of students from Corangamite. And I know schools like Covenant are very, very pleased with this certainty, with this funding model, because one of the plans that Covenant has is to provide more funding for those students with a disability. They've got some incredible ideas, and they really welcome the opportunity to plan long-term. And I do actually want to reflect on Craig Emerson's comments, the former Labor Minister for Tertiary Education, who said in the Australian Financial Review on the 23rd of May 2017, a former Labor Minister who worked very closely, I might add, with the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard in the last Labor-led parliament. Now, here is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to lock in a school funding system that can give every disadvantaged child a chance of a good education. And Labor has pledged to block it. It's heartbreaking. This is a former Labor Minister for Tertiary Education who worked very closely alongside the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard, and Craig Emerson says it is absolutely heartbreaking that we've seen 10 years of funding certainty, of a plan that delivers fairness, and he's now basically revealed Labor members for what they are. they will stand in the way of any good policy. It doesn't matter what we bring to this parliament. The Labor Party is there to do one job, and it is to oppose. And it's very regrettable that the Labor Party is opposing this policy. It is wonderful for school students, it's wonderful for parents, it's wonderful for this nation, and I commend this bill to the House.